Hello, and welcome to No Peeking, where I solve puzzles blindfolded. Today, I'm going to be attempting the Latch Cube. Thank you to everyone who has suggested this. This is the #1 most suggested puzzle for No Peeking. The Latch Cube is a modified version of a 3x3. They have the same piece types that turn in the same manner. The only difference are these arrows. An arrow indicates that this piece can only turn in that direction. So if a face has at least one white arrow, it can only turn clockwise. It's prevented from turning counterclockwise. If a face has at least one black arrow, it can only turn counterclockwise and not clockwise. If a face has no arrows, you can turn it normally either direction. But if it has both colors, it's prevented from turning at all. This has an interesting bandaging effect that makes for a quite difficult solve. So let's take a look at how to do it blindfolded. The method that I've designed is based heavily upon a really great cited method on Yap's puzzle page, which is linked in the description. The bandaging is so severe that a lot of this solve has to be tracked through a cited method rather than using a normal blind method. So I'm going to be describing the changes that I've made to Yap's method to make it a little bit more blind friendly. Phases 1, 2, and 3 of Yap's method remain largely unchanged. In these steps, you want to separate the white and black arrows from each other and then configure them so that there are two on each face opposite from each other. The only way that my method differs from Yap's is that I intentionally place the white arrows on the black, blue, and red faces in phase 1 so that I can skip steps A, B, and C of phase 3. In phase 4, you solve the 6 edges with white arrows. By this time, you will have all 6 of these pieces in these 6 positions. They will just be swapped amongst each other, like this. Now there are 2 algs that Yap has provided for this step. The first swaps these 3 pieces, and it looks like this. I will not be using this alg because it also swaps the corners. The second alg swaps these 3 pieces, and it looks like this. F3, U2, L prime, U2, L prime 3, F. Now, I'll also not be using this alg because it swaps the corners. However, if you do the sequence U2, L prime, U2, L prime 3 5 times instead of once, it will swap the pieces in the opposite direction while preserving the corners, like this. This alg is very nice because it allows us to do phase 4 without having to track the corners. There is a small modification you have to make, and that is combining steps C and D. C is to solve this piece, and D is to solve this piece. But if you set them up smart, for example, putting this piece here and this piece here, you can solve them both using that corner-safe alg. The only time you may have to track corners during phase 4 is if you encounter parity during step F. Phase 5 is very similar to phase 4. It is just mirrored on these pieces with black arrows. There are 2 very similar algs, and I make the same modification to the second of those algs. The only way that phase 5 differs from phase 4 is the way that I deal with parity. In phase 4, the parity is left until the end. You check if 2 pieces are swapped, and if they are, you fix them. However, the parity alg in phase 5 swaps 4 of the edges. And since we're doing a blind solve, and we are able to tell if we have parity before doing anything, it's best to move that parity alg to the start of phase 5. It will save time in execution because you'll have to do less algs. Phase 6 is where our methods differ the most. The only similarity is in the algs. Yap has provided 2 3 cycles that we can perform on the Latch Cube. The first cycles UFR, BUR, and BUL, like this. The second cycles UFR, BUR, and LUF, like this. Through these two algs, we can solve the corners using a traditional blind method. We will use UFR as the buffer, BUR as a helper buffer, and then we can set up pieces to either LUF or BUL and use one of those algs to cycle them. This diagram shows you how to set up pieces. Let's use this case as an example. Our target is DFL. So if we take a look at that diagram, we see a white arrow pointing from DFL to BDL. This means that if we set up the cube with white on top, we can use one of those 2 3 cycles to move DFL into BDL, like this. Now, let's take a look back at the diagram. There is a yellow arrow that points from BDL to BUL. So, we can position the cube with yellow as the top face and perform one of those 3 cycles. Now the piece is set up into one of the 2 locations we can swap into. So, we can perform a 3 cycle to swap the pieces. And then we just have to undo those 2 algs we did to set up the pieces. Now we are on phase 7, which is the final phase. And in this phase, we orient the corners. Yap has provided 3 corner orientation algorithms. The first will twist UFR and UFL. The second will twist UFR and UBL. And the third will twist UFR and DBL. Now there are 2 conditions under which a corner can be misoriented. It is either already permuted correctly but misoriented at the start of phase 6, or it is one of the 2 buffers. Now there are 2 ways you can go about doing corner orientation. You can memorize all 3 of these algorithms and use them where needed. And this is what I have opted to do. But you could also only memorize the first alg because you will need that if these 2 are flipped. If any other corner is flipped, you can simply shoot to it twice, which will remove the need to learn the second and third alg. This will make for a slightly longer execution, but ultimately it will free you of 2 algs that are sort of long and hard to memorize. Now, if you want to get really fancy, you could float to a different helper buffer if this is twisted, and that would eliminate the need to memorize any orientation algs. But I'm not going to go over how to do that in this video. Alright, that method is pretty convoluted, but it's the best that I'm going to get. So now it's just a matter of doing attempts. This is Latch Cube Blindfolded Attempt 1. Dude! First try? I am so pleased with how that solve went. It had the perfect amount of luck. Not so much to where it's boringly simple, but also enough so that there's no annoying or frustrating cases that I had to deal with. The solve flowed really well, tracking went great, there was no major errors, and obviously it ended up solved. It was a 10 out of 10 solve, but would not do it again. I'm pleased enough with the time as it is. I don't think it could be that much faster, and I also am not sure how many more attempts I'd have to do to get a second success. So unless one of you decides to beat my time and prompt me to take the world best back, this is probably the fastest you'll see it. I would love if that happened though. I think anyone motivated enough could beat my time. Before I end this video, I've got an announcement that I know a lot of you are going to love. I am going to begin training for more 13 blind attempts. Now, I don't know when the next attempt will be, so don't ask me for a specific date. I'm just going to train, and when I feel ready, I will do an attempt. But if you would like to see that process, I'm going to be streaming some of it on Twitch. So if you want to see some behind the scenes like building tables for letter pairs and algs, using flashcards to memorize those tables, or doing practice partial solves of the 13 by 13, you can follow me at the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and let me know what puzzles you'd like to see me solve on the next episode of No Peeking.